But how about this? What about toxic femininity?
Mm-hmm.
And now everyone is going to say, that's some kind of whataboutism, We talk about this problem, and then you're going to talk about that problem instead. But, okay. There's a lot to say about that, actually.
There is.
Sometimes I think it's a good point. Sometimes it's a good point to say that we should focus on one problem at a time.
Of course. That's
and I think I want to say something about that, because my opinion is that imagine you say that you really think the refugee crisis in Syria is a big problem. And then I say to you, well, what about the people dying in Africa from malaria, for example? Or what about the old ladies in my hometown who are not getting enough pension? Something. That would be a bad thing to say, I think, because then you're sort of ignoring one problem to talk about your own problem.
Yeah, you're talking about two different problems that really have nothing to do with each other.
Exactly, and there's no need to start a conversation about the other problem when someone is trying to talk about what they care about, right? So that, I think, then it's okay to say you shouldn't do that. But if you say, I really care about the refugee crisis in Syria, and at another time when someone is referring to the people dying of malaria, that person is laughing. Like, that's so stupid. How can you care about that? It's unimportant.
Who does that?
This is a hypothetical example.
Okay,
obviously, these two opinions don't usually go this way. But
yeah.
I'm using the less, politically infected opinions now to just make everyone think as clear as possible about it. And I feel like, okay, so then I have the right to criticize you. If you seem to be caring about something, but not about something equally bad, in fact, you even don't think it's a problem, then I can say, but what about the kids dying of malaria?
And that's because you want to somehow dig deeper into that person's motivation for thinking the way they do.
Exactly, because I can question that person's morality if they seem to be inconsequential in this way. And many feminists, for example, and I'm sure this is true about many opinions, but today we're going to focus a little bit on feminism, I guess. And many feminists, they tend to do just that. They say, there's a big problem here, women are oppressed. Okay?
Yeah.
And that's fine, you can say that. That is nothing I want to criticize initially, although there are, of course, many things to discuss about that. But when I see them completely ignoring all else, like the problems, not just the problems men have, they don't just ignore those problems, but like any other problem in the world seems to be quite unimportant to them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the emotional responses to other things seems to be like non-existing. Okay, so a good example of this was when I saw a post on Facebook. It was a YouTube video which contained some scenes from different movies with Harrison Ford, and in those clips, Harrison Ford was quite dominant, so to speak, to woman characters.
Yeah, exactly. It's from Star Wars, right? And from Indiana Jones and
Not Star
Blade
Wars.
Runner.
It was from Star Wars. Yes, sorry. Yes, Star Wars and Blade Runner and Indiana Jones, I think.
Exactly.
And in Blade Runner, he is probably... I mean, that's the most extreme example, I think, because he's pushing Rachel, the character Rachel, up the wall, and he forces her to say... He doesn't force her in a obvious way, but he asks her to tell him that, I don't know, she loves him or something like that.
In a quite aggressive way as
well. In a quite aggressive way. So it's like, with his like strength, he is basically forcing her.
Mm-hmm.
But there is an undertone here that says that she is also wanting it, I mean, her consent is to be assumed underneath somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, whatever. So he is in these different movies acting quite badly to a woman, one might say. I mean, it can be discussed how bad, but we can just, for the sake of the argument, assume that it is bad, what he does to this woman. Okay, so that created rage among at least, a lot of people on that Facebook post who commented on it. And I know, because I know these people, some of them at least, that they don't have anything in general against meaningless violence in fictive meaningless violence in movies. Okay, so they don't have anything in general against that. For example, it's a very typical conservative opinion that violence in computer games or in movies are somewhat damaging to young people, like they are inspiring them to be criminals or whatever. That is something that conservatives usually say, not progressive people, right? And if a conservative person say, oh, we should stop, we shouldn't have blood and swear words and stuff like that in video games because that's going to ruin our kids, they are laughing at them. They're like, ha ha ha, you are a conservative bigot, you know, who thinks that computer games are dangerous when we have real problems. And that is the typical progressive opinion.
It is.
Okay?
Yeah.
So suddenly, when we have this fictive sexual harassment, they are screaming like, no, my God, this is going to be like, this is such a typical example of structural sexism, and it's going to spread through society through these cultural memes, you know. And it's like, okay, that's a fine opinion. It can be discussed, but it's an opinion and it might have some valid points. But if you at the same time reject the opinion that other bad behaviors among heroes in culture, that is not, you know, justified in any specific way. A lot of violence is, you know, justified because they're gonna save someone or something like that. But a lot of it is meaningless. Like the other day I saw a movie called Mayhem.
Okay.
And it was just totally, you know, uber violent. And most of that violence was unjustified. But it was funny because it was like ultra violence, you know. So much violence that it became sort of funny. And there was blood everywhere, etc. Now, that was a pointless kind of violence. And no one is batching an eye.
No.
Okay?
I know what you were going with this.
I understand it. Certainly, feminists aren't batching an eye towards that movie. Perhaps when it comes to the sex scenes, I don't know, but still. So there is a case here where they are super mad about fictive bad things.
Exactly.
Bad behaviors, and then there are bad behaviors that they don't give a shit about.
And we could imagine that one created a movie, just like that movie that you talked about, which I haven't seen, but where you don't have meaningless violence, you have like meaningless rape or something instead. Like ultra rape all over the place, but people don't die. For example, they are raped. That would of course be just as bad. But I somehow get the feeling that this ultra rapey movie would be more scandalous than this ultra murder movie which you've seen. When I think that arguably you can say that murder is worse than rape. Because I think that even though rape seems to be a really horrendous experience, I think that most people still would prefer to be raped over murder.
Exactly, and I think that's a good point because it's a very interesting contradiction that people react strongly to rape than murder, but intellectually we understand that murder is worse than rape, because if you see someone getting raped, you don't think that, oh, if I should kill him now to make him suffer less than being raped.
Exactly. Or if you see somebody who's about to get raped and you know that the only way to get the person out of that situation is by killing the person who's going to be raped.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so you don't even have to like let it go on for a while and then murder a person, because that would be twice as
exactly.
bad.
It's like you have two rooms you can enter, and in one room you're going to be murdered, and in one room you're going to be raped. You know, very few people will enter the murder room,
or
right?
send someone else into the...
Exactly.
I don't think so, at least. I might be wrong. But
I mean, I think I would have been morally justified to send a person into the rape room rather than the murder room.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a horrific choice.
Of course.
If I have to make it. But if I have to make it, that is the choice I would make.
Yeah.
And I think most people would.
And I don't think you would be somehow berated for it afterwards. I think most people would say that, well, that was a horrible choice that you had to make, but I don't know if they would say that you made the absolutely wrong choice. You should have sent that person to the murder room.
Exactly. I think it's quite, that's quite clear.
Exactly. And so in that way, we can somehow with these, we maybe not establish, but we can say that it's many people probably believe that murder is worse than rape, and therefore a murder movie, so to speak, where you promote, or rather where you glorify murder, should be worse than a movie where you glorify rape.
Exactly. And that is not the case. It's...
No, absolutely. I watched like murderous movies when I was like 12. When I watched, like, or maybe when I was younger.
Yeah,
like,
and in these progressive circles, many movies with a lot of ultra-violence is considered good movies. Like, I know that for some reason, some feminists think that Starship Troopers is a good movie because they depict gender roles in a kind of equal way.
Yeah, exactly.
So they're actually using that as an example of a good movie in that sense. Because they're like showering together in the military, and they have, it's quite equal in that imagined society. But there is a lot of ultra violence in that movie. Okay?
Oh yeah, for sure.
They're nuking like sentient bugs, and they are doing horrible things to each other as well. So that's not a problem apparently, and that's a contradiction. Because if you think that bad behavior in fiction can influence society in a negative way, then all bad behavior should be able to do that. And
unless then, that you think that, no, I haven't heard this argument, but if you think that, well, people won't get sort of inspired by watching violence, but they will be by watching like rape and stuff like that. I mean, if that's a conclusion that you somehow can draw, I don't know if they do, but I guess that you at least in that way could logically separate the two and say that this depiction is harmless, this one isn't. That therefore I choose to be more upset with the non-harmless depiction.
You can make that case perhaps, and then you have to argue for it. But this is not the case. I mean, these people aren't making that argument.
No, I haven't heard that argument either, no.
It should have appeared, for example, in the discussion I was involved in on Facebook, if it existed, but it didn't. Instead, it ended with me being banned by one of the extreme feminists, and everyone was super angry at me for making the point I basically stated here.
Yeah.
Because in those clips, in these movies, of course, yes, I think it's just worth mentioning that, okay, so Harrison Ford is doing some bad stuff to women, but he's doing a lot of bad stuff to a lot of other people as well.
Oh, yeah.
In these exact movies. I mean, in Blade Runner, he is basically hunting down sentient slaves who hasn't done anything wrong except escaping their slavery and trying to have a normal life. But he is hired to kill them.
Exactly.
And he's seen as some kind of anti-hero, perhaps. No one is saying that is a huge negative influence on society.
No, exactly. And if you would, it would be interesting if you would maybe we should do this, right? Create a video like trying to somehow expose Blade Runner in that way.
Yeah.
And be like, what is he really doing? Look at this. He's killing slaves who have escaped from their masters.
Basically.
Isn't this extremely wrong? And I think that most people seeing that movie would be, I don't think that they would somehow even...
What would happen if you saw that, these feminists would laugh their asses off, okay? The person who posted this on Facebook, being very concerned, he will be posting it in an ironic way. I mean, this alternative video, and laugh at it. And that is the kind of contradiction that I initially wanted to talk about, because then I have the right to say, but what about the other crimes in these movies? It's not that I try to make the point that is a more important problem, that the rape is more important, that the murder is more important than the rape, but rather I am criticizing your moral constitution, right? You seem to be saying that this is very bad, while you basically don't think something equally bad is bad at all. And then you have to that's just stupid. It's just, completely confusing, and that person deserves to be criticized for it. So that is not a whataboutism. But that was, of course, what I was criticized for doing when I made this point. Like, okay, there is a contradiction in your own statements. That was my point. And then it was like, oh, why are you talking about murder now and you're focusing on sexual harassment? But that was not my point.
No.
But of course, I didn't understand it. I was banned and everyone was angry.